This episode of the Plant Pod is sponsored by Pershore College. Pershore is a vibrant hub of learning nestled in the heart of Worcestershire, where education meets innovation in the fields of horticulture, animal welfare, and agriculture. At Pershore College, they understand that learning is a journey that goes beyond textbooks. Whether you're just starting your career or looking to enhance your skills, Pershore College offers a range of courses tailored to meet the needs of the modern professional. From state-of-the-art facilities to hands-on training in their stunning gardens and commercial nursery, students gain real-world experience under the guidance of expert instructors. But Pershore College isn't just about plants and animals, it's about growing people. It's about cultivating a community where students can thrive, with support and resources that extend well beyond the classroom. Their commitment to student success in a sustainable and innovative environment makes Pershore College the perfect place to plant your seeds for the future. So if you're ready to grow, to innovate, and to lead in an ever-evolving field of agriculture, animal science, and horticulture, then visit Pershore College online at www.wcuc.com/horticulture. Discover more about their programs and how you can become part of a community that's shaping the future of the natural world. Pershore College is where your future takes root. In this episode of the Plant Pod, I got to chat with Alan Frampton of Cambridge HOK. Alan is fourth generation in the horticulture industry. He established the UK's largest cut flower operation, Donaldson Flowers, where he was the managing director for 24 years from 1987 to 2010. He supplied businesses such as Sainsbury's and Waitrose. Cambridge HOK is known for its cutting-edge contributions to the field of horticulture technology. Cambridge HOK is revolutionising the way we think about sustainable agriculture and indoor growing solutions. This is Season 2, Episode 6 of the Plant Pod. Let's get into it. Alan, thank you for joining me here on the Plant Pod. Your time is really appreciated.
Thank you for inviting me.
So you are Alan Frampton of Cambridge HOK. How did you get your start in horticulture?
Well, I was quite privileged. I'm fourth generation horticulturalist, and my father was a horticulturist, and my grandfather and my great grandfather, and they were based on the south coast. And so I grew up on nurseries as a young boy. I think I did my first paid day. I think my father paid me for my first day work when I was about 4 or 5 years old. Every single holidays, we were kicked out of the house and we were on the nursery working. So I knew nothing different, but I loved it. I used to I'd go to Sunday school on a Sunday morning and then spend the next 2 hours playing on the nursery. And it was like being part of a large family. And in those days, and I'm talking about the 60s now, glass houses were very old fashioned and very basic.
Yeah. Being fourth generation, did you have, I don't want to say have a choice, but did you have a choice of going into horticulture, or was it you are going into horticulture, or because you grew up with it, it's what you wanted?
Oh no, it absolutely was what I wanted. I couldn't wait to get into horticulture. I loved working on nursery during the holidays. I didn't want to do anything else. I found academic studying to start with to be, it wasn't what I wanted. I enjoyed practical, driving tractors and working hard all day long, and the rewards of planting a crop and then seeing the crop come to fruition. The difficulties of the environment not being right or pest disease not being right. How do you deal with that? And no, I loved it, and I didn't really flourish academically until my third year at college. I went to St Albans, Oakland's College of Horticulture, and once I got to the third year, I just loved it. It was everything I wanted to do.
Was it a cut flower nursery or was it a potted plant nursery?
I grew up growing crops like all year round chrysanthemums, carnations, pot chrysanthemums, poinsettias, apples, uh, cuttings. We were one of the first families to actually go south to get good weather to grow during the winter period. So my family started in the Canary Islands in the early 60s. So I learned about mother stock, uh, elite stock, breeding. We had our own breeding facilities. We had our own plant health unit. We had so we were producing cuttings of chrysanthemums and carnations for all over Europe.
So with the breeding back then, was it cross pollination? Was it?
Yeah. So you would start with we had a very good breeder working for us. He went on to breed for other people as well. There was a character called Barry Machin, who was a super breeder, and he would start typically with 250, 300,000 cross-pollinated flowers, and he would whittle those down, and you were lucky if you got 5 or 6 varieties out of them.
Really? That
Yeah,
many?
and they were the old-fashioned varieties. I mean, you'd never grow any of them these days, but they were great from a color point of view, but they weren't as productive as the modern varieties.
So was it a big nursery considering how many varieties you started off with? 250,000 or
The family nursery
yeah.
at its peak, the family nursery had about 25 acres of glass.
Okay.
So it was a big company, yes.
Yeah.
It was a big company.
And with how breeding has come on now, I suppose back then you didn't have any artificial lighting or anything, so you couldn't. So now if you was to crossbreed, you could put it in a hydroponic chamber and maybe force it and make it quicker.
Yes, of course. Uh, Breeding has changed dramatically. It's much more scientific. But the reason that the family business, it in the sort of early 70s, there was a really serious oil crisis, not as bad, ironically, as the current gas price crisis was a couple of years ago, but it was serious enough. We didn't have thermal screens. Greenhouses were designed to capture winter light. They weren't designed for labor efficiency, and so the company deteriorated after the company was started in 1887, the family business, and it deteriorated during the 70s because of the lack of automation, the lack of energy efficiency, the lack of productivities. So it went through a tough time.
Where did you go after the nursery closed?
Well, the nursery didn't close because I was fourth generation. It got a bit complicated with the shareholding. There were lots of family members who weren't part of the business, and anyway, there was a sort of night of the long knives, and one of my uncles got control of the business, and I didn't agree with. I was a young man. I was in my 20s. I didn't agree with what he was doing, and my brother was Colin was he was running the scientific side of the business, the plant health unit. I was the production manager of the UK production at the time, and we decided that we wanted to set up on our own and run our. We didn't want to work hard for somebody else. We wanted to work hard for ourselves.
Yeah.
So my father had retired and essentially was a figurehead for the family business. With his support, we went off and started on our own in 1987 and we built 3 acres of modern Dutch Venlo glass houses.
And is that when you started doing cut flowers?
That's when we specialised in doing chrysanthemums because my brother and I had spent most of our youth growing chrysanthemums. We'd been out. I'd worked in the Canary Islands. I'd worked in Spain. My brother had worked in the Canary Islands for a number of years, So it was a chrysanthemum's a very specialist product, and my father was a specialist in it. So we thought that between the three of us, we could have a good go at this, and that's what we did.
Yeah.
But the key to it was when we built the nursery, we made sure that it was really efficient from an energy point of view and really efficient from a labor point of view.
Yeah.
So we were very competitive right from day one.
How many was you turning over a year, croissants? Was it a lot?
Well, when we started, we had 3 acres. We grew over a period of time, and over after about 16, 17 years, we got up to 16 acres, 16 and a half acres of glass.
Yeah.
So we were at peak. We were growing about 500,000 stems a week.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Of British grown as well.
No. We were the biggest in the country by a long
Yeah.
way, and certainly under glass, no one's ever been that sort of size in modern glasshouse facilities.
So how did you pack them to go out? Did you have transport, your own transport, or was you using
No,
couriers?
we in I was so essentially we had conveyor belts that ran over the flower beds.
Yeah.
And originally, we used to cut by hand into paper sleeves of about, depending on the quality, 10, 15, 18, or 20 stems per paper sleeve. And those paper sleeves were then carried by the cutter to the end of the bed where they were put into either buckets or trolleys. And then those trolleys were taken over to the pack house.
Yeah.
And with that method of harvesting, you would probably be able to cut and transport to the pack house about 200 stems per man hour. When in 2005, when we put our new greenhouse in, our beds were 75 meters long. We'd have a robot going along the soil like a hedge trimmer cutting the stems. We'd have a conveyor belt over the top of the flower beds, which was 75 meters long, which took the flowers to the main path where there was a mother car which turned the flowers round from taking them off the bed, and then we had a conveyor belt under the path which took them to the pack house.
Yeah.
The conveyor belt came up from underneath the path into the pack house onto a machine which cut them to length, took off the bottom stems. The rubbish was taken off on another conveyor belt into a green waste skip. And then the machine put a little tie on it, one of those elasticated bands you see in the supermarkets. And then there'd be somebody there. They would this is now an air-conditioned pack house, so the temperature's nice and cool. You put the flowers into a plastic sleeve, into a box, and then straight into the cold store. And our average time into the cold store was about 3 minutes, compared to the old systems, which could have been an hour and a half into an ambient pack house, but just in water.
That's
And
amazing.
we'd do about 3,500 stems per man hour into from a harvesting point of view. So we would harvest. Two people would harvest. They would harvest 50,000 stems by about 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
That's
I mean, it was
absolutely
unbelievable.
amazing.
It was extraordinary.
To go fully, sorry.
No. The concept of that sort of production had been developed over a period of about 15, 20 years. And so we would harvest by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Then the netting that supported the crop was automated as well. So you'd push a button and the nets would go up in the air. The tractor would come in, prepare the soil. You'd put the nets back down on the floor, lay the plants out, and the following morning at 7:30, you'd have people in, and you'd have the whole bay planted by lunchtime the following morning. So the key was that the ground wasn't empty for more than 20 hours.
Yeah.
So you optimized your glasshouse utilization.
So to go fully automated like that, I know you said it was over like 15 years of thought, but was that when you started thinking, did you ever think you would get that big and be able to do it? To go fully automated?
Yes, in the early days, we knew that we were supplying the wholesale markets around the country till about 1995.
Yeah.
And the cost of shipping to wholesale markets, the wholesale markets taking a commission, and then for florists to be able to buy it was hugely inefficient. And it wasn't the best ideal way of doing things. And we were also competing with flowers from Holland that were coming in overnight. And it was a real challenge. So in 1995, we started supplying the supermarkets. So we used to do the croissants for Sainsbury's and Waitrose, and we did Marks and Spencer's as well. So that meant that our average price was much better. There was no fluctuation in the price like you would be if you're supplying a wholesale market. I quite often the wholesale market in August, if the weather was really hot and everyone was on holiday, the price would hit the floor. Equally, in times like February and March, where there weren't many flowers around, the price on the wholesale markets would be high, but you didn't have many flowers to take the advantage of having a high price.
Yeah. And you touched on there with Holland and being able to get flowers overnight. How important is it, do you think, for British growers and to be able to compete with the Holland market? And I know it's not something that can be done easy.
The world economy, the economy has worked on the basis of you're buying from the cheapest source. So you see lots of stuff from China. Apple phones come from China now, from India. That's part of the financial landscape we live in, and you have to accept it.
Yeah.
And I was building farms in Spain in the 80s, and they were supplying stuff we couldn't really grow in the winter, like lettuce and tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers, and still do largely. That's moved down into places like Morocco, North Africa, Egypt. And so you have to, glasshouse horticulture works where the land is cheap and there's a good cheap energy, either being natural energy or and a good supply of water, good, clean, fresh, non-salty water.
Yeah.
So you've really got to, but we bring in stuff from all over the world now. We have, grapes are the really interesting one. If you look at the supply of grapes around the year into supermarkets, and you look on the packets, they come from, come from South Africa, and then from Namibia. Then they start coming from places like Brazil, and then Peru, and then Chile, and then back down. It goes round that sort of South Atlantic basin, and then it comes up into Egypt in May. You get Spanish grapes in July, So, and that's how you get this consistent supply. The consumer wants to be able to buy. People talk about seasonality, but the reality is 98% of consumers, if they like something, they want to buy it all the time. Avocados is another one. If you look at cucumbers and where they come from, tomatoes, Morocco is a super climate for growing in the winter. And so whilst I'm sad that growing flowers all year round in this country is no longer financially viable, I kind of accept that from a consumer point of view, it's availability that's important. And that may be, I may have been brainwashed by supermarkets over a period of years, but a lot of vegetable growers and salad growers have adapted to that, and they've got nurseries to get continuity of supply. They've got nurseries that are some have got nurseries not only in the south coast of the UK, but they've got nurseries in Spain, or Morocco or somewhere like that, or some of the vegetable growers have got farms in places like Senegal on the west coast of Africa, which from a shipping point of view, you have to get the transport right. So you need to be able to, with one or two exceptions, you can use air freight, but air freight's not great for a lot of things. But sea freight now with environmentally controlled containers is fantastic for lots of products. And if you're on the west coast of Africa, or even places like Alexandria in Egypt, it's only 7 days by container up to Felixstowe. So it's really doable. Yeah. But other places, you don't always grow, when you grow in the southern climates, you're not looking just for somewhere that's flat and warm with a good climate and water. Sometimes you're looking for altitude. So some specific crops grow very much better at altitude. And I'm thinking in the flower sense of roses, the best roses in the world come from farms that are, in the case of places like Kenya, 7,000, 8,000 feet above sea level. South America, if you go to places like Colombia, it's 10, 11,000. Ecuador, as high as 12,000. And you get some magnificent production at that sort of level, because you get this, it's on the equator and you get year-round sun. So you get this consistent production, and they grow much more slowly because of the altitude. So you get this much better quality product. It's stunning.
Yeah. And going back to with when pulling out the chrysanthemums, and there'd be some back in there within 20 hours. For that crop rotation, did you change any of the soil?
No, we used to plant in peat blocks.
Okay.
And they would the peat blocks were 5 centimeters. When we were propagating, we'd buy in unrooted cuttings, and we would put them in peat blocks on a heated concrete floor. And those peat blocks were 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters by about 3.5. And so actually the problem we had was a buildup of peat on the soil. And over a 20-year period, it's over a centimeter a year, the increase in the level of soil. But with that intensity of production, very few crops are grown in the soil these days. Most crops are grown in gutters, like cucumbers, peppers, tomato, even lettuce now. But because of the density of flowers per square meter, and we were planting about 61 plants per square meter, and the type of plant, and we were growing 5 crops a year. So tomatoes, you're planting 21,000 plants per acre, and then sorry for me changing my
No, it's fine.
terminology, but and so therefore we were planting and harvesting 260 plants per square meter, and you couldn't do that in gutters; it just wouldn't work. So what we used to do is we used to sterilize the soil, and we went from the old days. It was steaming, but the steam was very poor quality and made the soil very wet and wasn't particularly good. And then we went from that to a product called methyl bromide, which was a nasty chemical, which was quite dangerous. And then we went from that in the late 90s. We put in what's called a superheated steam system, which took the steam off the boiler at about 105 degrees centigrade and then superheated it to 140 degrees centigrade. And you put the big enough pipes in so you get the pressure. Steam's a fascinating product, and then we used to sterilize 750 square meters at a time and cook it for 4 hours. And it was if you ever have a problem with soil or compost, if you cook it, you will get rid of everything. So we used to cook it, and we used to get rid of everything down to about 7 or 8 inches. We'd go, instead of going over with a rotavator, which was what we'd normally do, we'd go over the soil with a spader and break up any pans and anything like that, and we'd cook it with steam, and it worked really, really well. If you have any pathogens in horticulture, heat is probably one of the best ways of dealing with it. So if you've got trays, old pots, things like that, a lot of people sort of use chemicals, and there's some chemicals, but they don't kill all the pathogens. If you want to kill anything, you've just got to heat it up for a few hours above 72 degrees centigrade, and I promise you it'll kill everything.
Yeah,
and it's great. So heat is a very good way of dealing with pathogens, but not a lot of people use it.
Do you think it's just people don't use it because it's so hard to implement in greenhouse?
It is hard to implement. In our case, we were doing it on a large scale, and it was when we built the nursery, we installed it because it was such a good way of dealing with things, and it was it was very clean.
Yeah,
and it was very. I mean, the guys had to have proper training to deal with it, but it was very safe as well.
So did you have to add any nutrients back into the soil after?
The nutrient content of the soil didn't change.
Okay.
So, but what we would do is usually the crop after that, on Crescents, the base dressing was a little bit of lime and a little bit of monoammonium phosphate. All the potassium, all the potassium and the nitrogen was done with liquid feeding.
Yeah.
And all the micro elements. So we'd put those in with liquid feed, and that would work. That would work fine. With Crescents, we had very accurate spray lines that sprayed over the top, and but very simple. You're looking for a system that is totally automated.
Yeah.
So we didn't want to, hoses. We didn't use hoses. The only thing I think we used a hose for was we'd give the propagation area a spray over once or twice a day in hot weather. But for the rest of it, it was all automated. And it's about reducing your labor input.
Yeah.
And so if I took a nursery in the sort of 80s on a sort of like a 6-acre old-fashioned nursery, you'd have about 60 staff. The same acreage 30 years later, you'd have about 6 staff.
Yeah. So it's a massive difference.
Yeah. And people sort of go, oh, gosh, that saved you a lot of money. No, it didn't really save me a lot of money, because the retail price of selling, what we sold at the farm gate price was the same. We supplied the supermarkets for 15 years, we never got an increase in price at all, ever.
Yeah.
So you had to make yourself more efficient. And so that, whilst we reduced our labor by hours by 10, we increased the cost of the capital that you needed to employ, and you're paying everyone a lot more money.
Yeah. And you touched on chemicals there. Do you ever see a time in horticulture where we will not have to use chemicals?
If you look at, again, over the period of the last 30 or 40 years, when I was a young man, some of the chemicals we used were sort of World War I organophosphorus chemicals, granochlorine and organophosphorus. They were killers. If someone was to take a teaspoon of some of the old chemicals, they could be dead within 5 minutes. It was literally. So the use of chemicals, I worry from the growers' point of view, they haven't got the arsenal they used to have. But it's totally right that we shouldn't have those sort of things running around the place. And I do see a time when we will understand pathogens in a way that we can combat them in a much safer way.
Yeah.
So if I look at the arsenal that's available to growers today and what they're using, it's probably 15 to 20% in terms of the danger that we had 20, 30 years ago. So that's got to be an improvement. The problem is, with growing, technology is moving on so fast. You've really got to know what you're doing. So if you look at modern greenhouses now, they're putting insect-proof netting on the vents. They're almost total biological control. They've got bees for doing pollination, and they haven't got to worry about soil-borne pathogens because everything is grown in gutters hydroponically.
Yeah.
So, but that presents other problems, but those other problems you can now monitor. But looking at the computerization of glass houses, we are now talking about electronics surveillance on large-scale salad nurseries, where they're doing water analysis on the return water and on the delivery water, which analyzes the nitrogen, potassium, and the phosphates and all the microelements. So you're putting in a recipe that is absolutely right for the plant given the conditions.
Yeah.
And we're now measuring, where we used to measure before irrigation the radiation from the sun. There are now new bits of kit, not widely available commercially yet, but that have fluorescent camera images that measure the photosynthesis of the plant. So they feed the plant when it really needs to be fed and watered, as opposed to just relying on one input which is sun. So it takes more than sun. The sun is a good measure and has been a good measure for 25, 30 years. But if you can understand that the plant's efficiency is not based just on sunlight, it's based on sunlight plus temperature, plus the availability of CO2 to produce photosynthesis. So it's just developing faster and faster. And so you're getting better quality, better tasting, more uniform cropping. And whilst uniform may sound boring from a gardener's perspective, if you're trying to grow commercially and using labor or robots, you want your product to be as uniform as possible.
Yeah, 100%. And I suppose it goes down to that with supermarkets as well. I remember watching a documentary where the wonky veg, and it actually they sell like a wonky cucumber for a penny to Morrison's, so where a normal one might be 10 or 20p. But it's cheaper to do it that way and lose money than pay for them to go to landfill or to animal feed.
Well, in a modern a cucumber nursery, they will now produce about 360 cucumbers per square meter. A year.
That's a lot.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And the way in which they train them means that you won't get bent cucumbers.
Yeah. Okay.
So 99% will be straight and they'll be supermarket quality and they'll be fine. So they've designed the systems. The whole thing about glasshouse design over the last 50, 60 years has changed immeasurably. And all the things that could have gone wrong have been it's all been superseded, so that the glasshouse we're building today, firstly, they're immensely strong and they can put up with the sort of appalling weather that we've been having in the UK now. You can get a force 10 storm and a glasshouse will be fine.
Yeah.
Whereas 20 years, 30, 40 years ago, you get a nasty October storm and it would do a lot of damage. But they sorted that out. They used to use 3mm horticultural glass. We now use 4mm toughened glass largely. Sometimes float, depends on but the glass is surrounded on all sides of big panes of glass. The glass can be as much as 2 meters 40 by 1 meter 25. Huge panes of glass. Great. Typically you'll get 92, 93% light through that sort of glass. And the glass houses are designed to withstand inclement weather, and they're also designed they are not glass houses anymore. We call them enclosed environmental facilities. So they're designed to incorporate energy saving equipment, heating systems, and automation.
Yeah.
And so they've got trolley girders in them to support all this equipment. And they are, if I look at the greenhouses, when I was a kid, back in the 60s, I sound so old now, it's shocking. Back in the 60s, I remember old wooden vine houses where the gutters were sort of like 3 foot off the ground. And the main apex was like 16, 18 feet. Great for growing crops like grapes in the 30s and 40s and 50s and tomato, but useless from a labor point of view. And they used to have sort of like 6-inch cast iron steam pipes for heating, which if you touch them, let me tell you that really hurt.
You take the skin off.
Yeah. I mean, you do. I remember as a kid, I knew you didn't touch them because it was going to hurt. Whereas these days, working in a glass house, we've made it a very comfortable job.
Yeah.
Repetitive, yes, but comfortable. It is not backbreaking. It is not hard work anymore.
No, it's not.
Some of the outdoor crops are still hard work. That harvesting crops outdoors or even under polytunnels, you have to work hard. The strawberry crop, all the soft fruit crops, they're still better picked by hand. They've got robots. A robot will typically harvest about 18 kilos an hour of strawberries and do it. I mean, it's amazing to watch them work. But a good strawberry harvester will do 40 kilos an hour, and a very good one in the right conditions will do 60 kilos an hour. So things are changing, and it's only when you look back over a period of sort of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you see the immense improvement that's happened over that period of time.
But where does technology end? Like, will there ever be a stage where everything is high technology, automated completely, and you might only need one person in the glass house or two people in the glass house to control it?
If we talk about the most advanced cropping system that exists currently,
Yeah,
to my knowledge, it is for growing cannabis.
yeah,
If you grow cannabis in this country legally, you would probably have typically a warehouse, which looks like a giant. It's not big, actually. They're not big, these places. First of all, it's in a very secure location, and no one will know it's there. You will have security around it, like it was a secure prison, with guards and everything else. Then you would have what looks like a cold store facility, heavily insulated. And then you would have a totally controlled environment. And by that, I mean you'd have the latest LED lighting, which is so bright you'd have to wear sunglasses. You would have automated irrigation rigs. You would have ventilation rigs, which introduces heating and cooling so that you maintain the temperatures. The plant is growing for a fixed number of hours per day in the perfect environment.
yeah.
Which means a typical cannabis farm now, you're producing several kilos per square meter. But to get, you have to get a license, and only the very serious ones, and there are very few licenses in the UK, and only the very serious people can do it. But it is what I call the top of the tree in terms of production. If you said to me, could we use that to grow tomatoes, cucumbers? Yes, you could, but your cucumbers would cost, a cucumber costs about 80, 90p in the supermarkets at the moment.
Yeah.
If you do it that way, it would cost maybe 11, 12, 13 pounds for a cucumber. So long as we don't have a nuclear fallout where we've destroyed the planet, I don't see that type of production working for any other crop other than the one that's going to produce a very, very high revenue per square meter, because the cost of doing it is so high.
So what would several £1,000 per square meter then on cannabis?
Sorry, the cost of it,
as in like the outcome of it, so that once it's grown,
yes,
and what it would produce, it'd be several £1,000 per square meter, as in
yes,
money terms.
Yes, it would be. I mean, I would suggest over 10.
Yeah. Okay, that's really good.
Yes, but it'll cost
£10,000
you. I think I've got that right, but I'd have to check up on it. But 1,000. Oh yes. Yeah, it would be over £10,000 per square meter. But to actually, if you were to say to me, if I started now, you'd have to have, before you could start thinking about it, you'd have to sort of have 40 or 50 million pounds in the bank as a capital fund to start building it, that sort of farm. Then you'd have to have get the license, which may take 2 or 3 years. You'd have to have a customer for the product. The upfront costs are very high.
Is that because of cost of equipment? Because that
yes, and you have to do all the trials to make sure that the growing that you're suggesting that you're going to do is going to produce the quality of product. This is not just this is medical cannabis.
Yeah.
That you're going to produce the quality of product that is going to be suitable for medical needs. And it's a very exact science. So
Yeah.
it's a very the upfront costs are it prevents anyone thinking they can just play at it.
Yeah. And I suppose for getting a warehouse, and you touched on security, there's got to be a lot of rules and regulations as well that are involved with all that, with the license and
Yeah,
how you
because
can grow it.
because of the value of it.
Yeah.
This is
It'd be a round the clock security, wasn't it?
oh yes,
Like,
yes.
yeah.
So that's very much the top end market, and it's not a the Home Office are very clear about who goes into that market, and lots of people have talked about it, but the Home Office aren't interested in. This is something that it's a bit like Portland Down as the chemical testing facility in Salisbury. You've got to have places like that, but they have to be very secure and very because in the wrong hands it just gets out of hand.
Yeah.
And it prevents the criminal element getting near it.
Yeah. So even if I had 50 million in the bank to start it, there's no guarantee I'd be able to anyway because
Quite right.
of the regulations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say before you started your first crop, it would your first sold crop may be 4 to 5 years time.
Yeah. So there's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's really complicated. Yeah, let's stick to flower crops and pot plants and things like that. It's a lot easier
and a lot cheaper.
And a lot cheaper.
Just before we go off that, would you say the UK is becoming more and more of a medical cannabis grower?
No.
Okay.
The major countries are Canada, the States. In Europe, Germany is probably the strongest of all the European countries. I don't think even we do 10% of the European medical cannabis. Germany does about 45%. So no, we're not. Cannabis is such a political football, and the government can't really decide what they want to do with it, so they do nothing. It's a very, very specialist subject. But then, any of the modern sites now are very large for growing crops. So the salad crops, the supermarket commodity crops. But if you want to be successful nowadays, you have to have some form of energy that is not a fossil fuel.
Yeah.
Fossil fuels, if you're putting an investment in that's going to last 30 or 40 years, you have to have a heat or energy generating facility that is not based on fossil fuels. So biomass boilers, but even I think their life is going to be, they're going to recognize that the particles coming out of the chimney on biomass is not ideal. So they are going to have to do something about that. But the biomass is still affordable. Anaerobic digester plants is probably the number one. We talk about heat pumps, water heat pumps, which are groundwater heat pumps. Geothermal wells, you're not going to get many of in the UK. We're not on volcanic, heat sources like Iceland or somewhere like that, or the East African Rift Valley, which is quite good. Air source heat pumps, immensely expensive, and it's fine for a house or a small area, but for doing a 10-acre block, or typically now a modern greenhouse will be 20, 30 acres.
Yeah.
And you need that to cover the costs of having an irrigation rig, the computerization, the pack house, the facility, and you need enough product to fill lorries. You've got, your transport has to be efficient as well. So you want enough, so you're filling two articulated lorries a day, or 3 or 4 or whatever, so that you keep the whole thing very efficient into the supply chain. So glasshouse, development and how you design it now is not just about what's right for the crop. It's about you've got to have the right staffing of it. You've got to have the right power source. You've got to have the right sales. With the right distribution system going into those sales. Hence, in the 1920s, most of the nurseries supplying London were in the Lee Valley. just north of London, near Hoddesdon. Then in the late 50s, early 60s, everyone moved down to the south coast because the winter light was better. Then they moved along the south coast because the best light was in places like Chichester. And that's where the biggest concentration of glass was in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Nowadays, if you buy glass house land in Chichester, the land itself for glass houses is about £100,000 an acre in Chichester. Whereas if you go to where agricultural land is £10,000 an acre.
Yeah.
If you go to Spalding or Norfolk or Suffolk, you can get agricultural land to put your glass house on. Well, if you're building 30 acres, you don't want to be spending, £3 million on the land when you can spend £300,000 on the land.
Yeah.
So it's moving back up country and also the distribution of fresh produce from Norfolk and Suffolk and Lincolnshire is where it's all happening, and has been for some time, in all fairness.
Could you run a, say, 30-acre glass house on nothing but solar?
No.
No.
Not if you needed heat in the winter.
Okay.
You need a power supply for the winter. Solar panels are great if you need if you're growing a crop that needs heating and cooling. So cooling in the summer, heating in the winter, but low level heating. You can't do much more than about 5 or 6 degrees in the winter, because the power needed is so high. And solar panels are great in the summer, but they're not very good when there's, if you've got a cloudy day in the winter. To give you an idea, if in the depths of winter on a cloudy day in early January, you'll get maybe 60, 70 units of light.
Good.
On a sunny day in the summer, same place, you'll get 2,200, 2,300. So you're talking a difference of nearly 30, 35 times the amount of light. And so, and it depends where in the country you've got your solar panels. Solar panels originally were certified using a light level from Sheffield, whereas Sussex, you get 14% more light in Sussex than you would do in Sheffield, because it's further south. So PV panels, I think they're great, and I think they're great for, I think every house should have PV panels on, because it's a no-brainer, and it's such an easy thing to do, but it's a question of, there's always so many demands for government money and people's money, and it's a long-term project, and the deals out there currently, with the price of energy now, I think people are looking at it again.
Yeah. And there are government-backed deals, aren't there? Where you can get funding towards it to put them on your house.
Yes, I haven't looked into it recently, so I'm not really familiar with what's going on at the moment.
So would you say anaerobic digestion would be the way forward for powering a greenhouse? Like, in your opinion, if I was to start a 30-acre glass house now, and I came to you and said, Alan, what do I need to power it? In your opinion, what would it be?
So from a farming point of view, if you were growing maize, and instead of using the maize for food crops for beef, you use the maize for an AD plant. If you had a 30-acre glasshouse nursery, you'd probably need about 5,000 or 6,000 acres of maize.
Wow.
So if instead of digging up oil or pumping oil and ferrying it on ships and then refining it and then bringing that to site, or gas, right? By growing the crops, you can either sell the crops and produce food, or you can sell the crops and produce energy.
Yeah.
But to do a 30-acre nursery, I mean, I'm not sure I've even got the figures right exactly, but I would say it's probably about 6,000 acres of land for a 30-acre greenhouse. You would need a very big store to get you through the winter.
Yeah.
Because what happens is you put the maize or the green waste into a big tank that's like a cow's stomach. So it produces a warm water at about, I think it's about 38 degrees. It produces methane. And that methane you put through a generator, and that produces heat and electricity. And then you use that energy to power your greenhouse. So, and then it's just a matter of whether that's a cheaper way of producing energy and a better way of using the 6,000 acres to produce heat and power. Then it would be better than that than producing crops that you know, like wheat or barley or something like that.
Yeah.
And the straight answer to that is it depends on where you are in the country.
Yeah. It all depends on that geographical location, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So you are the regional sales manager of Cambridge HOK. How did that come about, going into Cambridge HOK?
When my brother and I sold our nursery, I had a number of years where I was an ethical jeweler. I saw the supply chain of fresh produce into supermarkets, and a friend of mine had this business that wasn't going very well, and I thought I could have a go at that, and so I bought the company and did it for about 8 years, and so I used to bring all the fair trade gold into this country and supply people all over the world from mines in Africa and South America, and then the Swiss gold refiners found they recognized what I was doing, and I was being invited to speak all over the world on ethical gold, and gold is very corrupt. And the jewelry industry in the UK is very old-fashioned. There's more traceability on a tomato in Sainsbury's than there is on a £50,000 diamond ring in Bond Street. I mean, unbelievable. And I've been to these places. I've been to all over Africa, all over South America. I've been to the mines, and I can tell you I've seen some horrific things. And these people are kept in poverty by the traders and by the big Swiss refiners. Anyway, long story short, the Swiss refiners lent these small cooperatives lots of money to do capital investments and signed them up to exclusivity deals and took me out of the market overnight. Wow. So I was in a position where I still wanted to work because I was very active, and I found myself, so that business, I closed that business down, and I phoned up a dear friend of mine who ran a company called More People in Stamford, which is the horticultural sort of headhunter business. And I said, if a job comes up, can you give me a buzz? Because I don't fancy sitting around at home or doing, the garden every day for the rest of my life, or playing, whatever.
Not ready to retire.
Anyway, exactly. So anyway, he phoned me up, and I went to see Patrick and at the time Ross Hibbs, and they wanted someone to look after the south of England from Birmingham south, basically, and that's what I do. So I go in and talk to customers about new buildings, glass houses. They say they want to grow something, and we'll talk about how they should do that with all the latest applications. So it could be anything from a garden centre to a private estate wanting a glass house for their perennials, or tower. I've got a tower farm in Surrey, which is quite interesting. So it could be anything.
Yeah.
And I find that quite interesting because it takes me all over southern England, and talking to growers and guys running garden centres, and I absolutely, it's great fun. I really enjoy it. And then I don't do as much of the work. I've got a great team behind me in the office, and Cambridge, they're well established. They've been going for over 60 years, and they have in their office, they have a HVAC department, heating, ventilation department, irrigation department, controls department, computer department, electrical department, civils department, structural engineering department. Have I named everything? It's like
farming department.
Yeah. They got guys doing vertical farms, and so there's some real specialists, and they have been responsible for all the facilities at Dyson's farm in Boston,
Yeah.
where Dyson has got what I was talking about, an AD plant, and they've now got something like 100,000 square meters of glass houses producing strawberries. And if you go into Sainsbury's or Marks and Spencer's, you can see Dyson strawberries, and it's the same Dyson as on a vacuum, and they're doing some great work up there and producing some really good crops. So they do some really technical stuff. We do a lot of work with research stations. We do a lot of work with colleges. I'm at Hadlow College in about 10 days' time for the opening of their Centre of Excellence, which is sponsored by Thanet Earth, which is one of the big salad producers on the North Kent coast. So that's interesting. But they're part of the Atrium Group, which is the world's largest glasshouse building company in the world. And we were talking today about the future, and it's very interesting seeing how the cost of moving fresh produce around the world is an issue. It's fresh produce, which is basically people's diet, is becoming more and more expensive, and we have to find better ways of doing it. Some countries will enable that, and some countries won't. But certainly, there's the market for glass houses in some countries is very good, and America is one of them.
Okay.
But so, it changes. You see, if you've got a glass house in Canada, for example, there's lots of glass houses in Ontario in Canada, and you'd think, gosh, it's cold over there. How can they afford to do that? But they've got cheap hydroelectric power. So they don't have fossil fuel boilers. They have boilers that are essentially electric boilers powered by fossil fuels. Powered by hydroelectric. So, that's another way around it.
It's amazing when you think about it, isn't it? That all the different ways. And like you say, with Canada, you think it's cold there, it's freezing. How do they do it? But the hydropower is
even some of these big farms in Africa. Absolutely, people sort of think, oh gosh, Kenya, that must be. They are super efficient. If you go to Lake Naivasha in Kenya, there's been a geothermal well there at a farm called Azarian for must be 25 years now. And it goes down 7,000 feet and brings up, it's a 16-inch pipe or something like that. And it brings up steam at about 200 PSI. And it's been powering the whole, the local facility, the vicinity for years. And I'm talking about the hospital, the schools, which are all put out in Africa now, in these rural communities. It's the farms that to keep the staff, they build a village. And if they build a village, they have to build a school. If they build a school, they have to build a hospital. And some of them are extraordinarily good by African standards, and they're not even bad by our standards these days. So, it's had a great effect socially on the local communities.
With not just Africa, but there are many other countries out there that have problems with fresh water. And have problems with feeding their people. Do you believe horticulture could put an end to that?
The people who I listen to on the television arguing about it's wrong for these countries to be exporting food when they need to be feeding their own people, it's a bit of a glib statement. What you find is that when a company goes over there and gives these people jobs, it creates an economy, and that economy, with the education and with the healthcare, creates the advantages for the local people.
Yes.
You can have if you're sort of 150 miles away from a farm, it's very difficult to do much about that, and you can't solve all the world's problems in just by doing one thing. But farms, generally speaking, that export. I can tell you, I had the privilege of working on a big farm in Egypt, and they had 6,000 employees producing 100,000 tons of fresh produce, 65,000 tons of citrus, 15,000 tons of grapes, 12,000 tons of strawberries per year, 3,000 tons of dry herbs, which is a lot of dry herbs. And the people in Egypt absolutely loved it. They
Yeah.
thought it was fantastic because it supported so many families. And the farm was really, really important. And they didn't take it for granted. And so, you really got to understand what's going on in the local communities before you pass judgment. And it's not for us to tell them what to do. If we can help them and we can, then that's fine. There's very little exploitation in supply chains into UK supermarkets.
Yeah.
They are absolutely red hot on making sure that the employment conditions are fair. And so, I can't see anything other than positivity from it.
Yeah. So it will have an effect on it.
I think the countries are developing very fast,
Yeah.
but there is still, some regions are still very difficult to, they get with certainly after the El Nino effect. If you look at what's going on from a climatical point of view across the world, you have got this huge disparity between zones that are becoming very arid and are in serious drought conditions. And I'm talking about even parts of Spain and parts of the world that are just flooded. And we've seen the pictures across the world this year of just extraordinary flooding. And California is one of them. California's had 3 or 4, they probably had a decade of drought. And then suddenly they've had a year where it's just been nothing but flooding.
Yeah.
And even Dubai had that huge flood about a month ago.
That was amazing.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
So what's happening with climate is that the increased temperature of the world is meaning that it's very difficult to predict a year out what's going to happen. And that makes it very difficult from a horticultural production point of view.
Yeah.
Even in if you've got glass houses, that's fine. But even if you talk to farmers about cropping, you've only got to watch programs like Clarkson Farm, and you'll see how difficult it is from year to year.
Yeah, I love that program.
Well, it is, and he's whatever you think about Clarkson, what he's done for farming is he's shown people just what really goes on.
Yeah.
And he's, he looks at animals and what they do, and he looks at different cropping, and he competes with Caleb on, let's run the farm and see if we can, and it's really hard work.
Yeah.
And the people who work on farms in this country are dedicated people. They work on the land and they do it. They do it because they're passionate about it, and they're very good at it in lots of cases. But getting it right first time is really difficult. I remember I wrote to someone just recently about it, and I said, well, I've been looking at farms across the world, and I've probably been abroad several hundred times to farms in my lifetime, and I still feel, from a horticultural point of view, I'm only scratching the surface.
Yeah.
You could always learn something from someone.
Yeah, the knowledge is always there to be passed down, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yes. Sadly, we're not doing enough about education in this country.
Yeah.
Although a lot of colleges are sort of waking up to that and doing something about it, which is great, because we went through a difficult time. You see, traditionally, it was always family members that, like me, grew up with it, loved it, wanted to continue. But then when the 80s and 90s came along, it was hard work. And there was a generation, my children's included, who just didn't want to be part of horticulture. They wanted to do something more exciting, pay more money for less work. And so we lost a lot of the families who were coming in by succession. So passing it on from generation to generation is a struggle. And if you ask where the old timers who can pass the information down, they're thin on the ground these days.
It's amazing, because when I was at school, I didn't know what horticulture was. So I'm 39 this year. When I left school, I hadn't heard about horticulture. I had no idea. And that's a big thing, isn't it, at the moment, like you say, with the education
and not surprised. Politically, in this country, horticulture is not important enough.
Yeah.
Agriculture isn't important enough. There was a time, maybe 30, 40 years ago, when we had the Ministry of Agriculture,
Yeah.
and there'd be a minister for agriculture, and there'd be, the NFU. They always reckoned the president of the NFU was in the top 10 most powerful people in the country. Well, that's not the case anymore.
No.
And the farmers aren't big political voters, so they don't carry any clout. But if you go to Holland, there's tremendous support for the horticultural industry. If you go to France, you've seen the farmers on the streets in France. You do not mess with the French farmers. It's a rural country. If you go
Yeah.
to Spain, very powerful. The Italian farmers, powerful. But we in this country, we just haven't had we by nature, the supermarkets are very clever at buying, and they will go to where they can get the best produce at the best price for the consumer.
Yeah.
And the consumer has benefited from that. And I understand that. But it does leave us in a situation where we don't have very good food security in this country.
Yeah.
And from that point of view, the government will need to wake up to that and say, so what are we actually going to do about it? Because if there is a shift in the geopolitical situation in the world, and there is a serious crisis, a third world war or something like that, we are vulnerable from a food point of view.
Yes.
And that's it's fine to have 50% of your food imports, but I bet our food imports are a lot more than that, more like 80%.
Yeah.
We import so much in the terms of basic stocks, so it's and of course, because our supermarkets are so efficient, it's just in time. So I don't think we haven't got any big stocks of anything anywhere lying around the country just in case. It's not the way it works.
I mean, there are people out there who are trying to push horticulture in education as well. We've got Lee Connolly, who's trying to push children's gardening and horticulture in education. The YPHA, the Young People in Horticulture Association as well, they're doing amazing work for people under the age of 35 and networking with everyone. And I think if all these get together and something will happen. They've already been in Parliament, they've already been talking. And I just think the way they're pushing horticulture as an industry and for education, I believe in the next 5 to 10 years, the government might actually do something with horticulture and get it out there in the forefront.
I think the gardening programs on television have been some of them I think are doing it very well.
Yeah.
I think it needs to become more readily available.
Yes.
That's the issue. And so there have to be courses at the colleges, and there has to be investment in commercial production, and not the local production is great, and I love all that. But if we're going to be more self-sufficient, we have to take a more serious view about it. And there needs to be. It's one of those things. I understand. From a macroeconomic point of view, there's a lot of demands on all the government money. So finding money, you have to take it from somewhere else to give it to you. So who do you take it from? And it's like that's the joys of politics for whoever wants to be a politician. Not me. I'm not in that. I'm not in that realm.
So, what advice would you give somebody who wanted to get into the industry?
So if there are lots of technical jobs in the industry that revolve around the supply chain.
Yeah.
So those are quality control, growers. Those are all the sort of degree-based qualifications that you need to get into those sort of jobs. Then there's the whole retail side, which is the garden centres, the farm shops, the social enterprises, where it's a bit more hands-on horticulture. And it's a great way of life. It is such a rewarding way of life. You meet some great, I've met some great people in my life. and I still, one of the things I love about my job is going onto site and talking to people who are actually doing the growing, because it's still about the passion and the detail. It's never going to be a very highly paid job, but it is a most rewarding job, and it's a really healthy job.
Yeah.
And it's a happy job. You will be much happier. And so there's lots of different options out there. And I would say, depending on, it depends on where you live. Horticulture you'll be growing the crops that grow best in your area.
Yeah.
So there are certain areas in the country that grow lots of wheat and barley, and other areas for potato. Pembrokeshire is a particularly good area for things like spring potatoes and milder crops. I always laugh at the daffodil crops. They start in the Scilly Isles, then they're grown in Cornwall. And when the Cornwall finishes, Lincolnshire starts. And when Lincolnshire stops, they go up to Scotland. So you get daffodils from January through to the end of April, mid-May.
Yeah.
It depends on where you are as to what's available and what sort of role you want to play in it. But plants always bring people a lot of joy. And that's the thing. You get rewarded for your efforts. So whether you're building a garden, or you're producing pot plants or flowers or salad crops, it's a hell of just to harvest lots of good crops is one of the great joys in my book. I still enjoy doing my own sort of vegetable plot. Ironically, not this year, but I did a vegetable plot during lockdown, and just loved it. I had sort of like 20 different things going on my vegetable plot, from potatoes to courgettes to runner beans to fennel, bush tomatoes, all sorts of things. Sweet corn, pumpkins. It's great.
Just being out there in nature as well, nurturing it.
Yeah.
From seed to plate.
Yeah. Really. Yeah. I'm watching what happened, watching what goes on and trying to resolve things, and, nursing the plants and making sure it had the right water, the right feed, the right everything.
Yeah.
And then you get a result.
Yeah.
And when you get a result, it's very rewarding.
So before I let you go, we touched on nuclear fallout. I've got one question that I want to ask everyone on this season of the Plant Pod. So nuclear fallout is about to come. We're colonising Mars. Alan, you're coming to Mars with us. You can take one plant, one fruit, and one vegetable. What do you take?
I would take a bunch of bananas.
Okay.
I would take some avocados. What else could I take? A plant.
A plant. So it takes one. So a plant seed, a fruit seed, a veg seed.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Well,
no, in that case, I've changed my mind, because all of those things take far too long to grow.
Yeah.
I would take some potatoes.
Okay.
I would take some courgettes.
Oh, haven't had that one yet.
Yeah, and I think I would take some tomato seeds.
Yeah. What type? Cherry? Beef tomatoes?
Gosh, that's interesting. No, I'd probably more beefsteak tomatoes than I do cherry tomatoes.
Yeah.
But if when you first asked the question, I would take you can buy these growth cabinets now that have everything in them with all the lighting, and you just plug them in and off they go. So I'd need one of those. I'd take one of those with me.
Well, I'd like to think if we was colonising Mars, we'd already have that equipment there.
Some biospheres or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what we need. We need some biospheres up there. That's what we need.
Alan, thank you for your time.
Ross, it's been a joy.
Honestly, I really appreciate it.
Not a problem at all. Hope it goes well. All the best to you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for having me.
that was episode 6 of season 2 of the Plant Pod. I know there hasn't been a few episodes for a few weeks. That's just because that I've been in uni. I've had a few assignments to get finished and get in before the end of term, and I'm happy to say that the end of term is done. I've just got an exam in June to do, which hopefully I'll smash that. Yeah, I've got a few episodes left for season 2. Probably 4 more episodes to release, which will be coming out in the next 4 weeks, basically. So yeah, until next week, take it easy.